I'm about to show you proof that Sasquatches are not only real, but have their own complex language system. I'm Robert. I'm a Canadian filmmaker and researcher, and I've been dedicated to figuring out the truth of Bigfoot ever since having my own encounter with one in September 2024. That's why I switched the focus of my channel to Sasquatch research. That's why you're here now watching this video. And let's see what we can figure out about these mysterious beings together. So, what evidence could I possibly bring to bear to back up these rather bold claims that Sasquatch not only exists as a species, but has a recognizable language, a complex system of sounds that convey specific and complex meaning, a language by the human definition of language? Well, as it turns out, there's a whole lot of evidence to back up these claims, and we'll see by the end of this video if I've successfully conveyed that evidence in a way that opens your mind to the point where you're at least willing to consider the possibility that this is accurate information. I should start by saying I won't be talking about the footprints with morphology that, according to many experts, is impossible to fake. I won't be talking about the hair samples that have been independently analyzed in great detail and match primate hair characteristics, but are not a perfect match for any known primate. And I also won't be talking about the various purported Bigfoot films, some of which have been analyzed by anthropologists, zoologists, wildlife biologists, and have yet to be debunked. I've already covered all of these topics in great detail in other videos, and I invite you to check those out if you're interested. In this video, I'll specifically be talking about a series of sound recordings that have been compiled that prove that non-human creatures have a complex, human-like language. I'm talking, of course, about the Sierra sounds. The Sierra sounds are a collection of purported Sasquatch vocalizations. Now, before we get into the evidence for the authenticity of these recordings and how we can conclude that logically there is a language here, let's talk a little bit about the background of the recordings. They were captured by two men during the early to mid-1970s, Ron Morehead, an investigator and adventurer, and Al Berry, an investigative journalist with a master's in science. It's worth noting that Al Berry was initially highly skeptical of the existence of Sasquatch or of their chances of capturing the audio of such a creature if by chance it did exist. Not that he believed it did. And even after the recordings, he spent literally years seeking out various audio experts and companies to analyze the recordings and prove them authentic or fake. He was very open to either possibility, and we'll talk more about that later. The recordings were captured, again, over multiple years in a remote area of the Sierra Nevada mountains. They involved multiple encounters with purported Sasquatch beings. There was food gifting involved and use of primitive camp setups to encourage repeated visits by these beings. Encouragement that was, by all accounts, highly successful. As I mentioned, the recordings were captured throughout the early to mid-1970s, specifically 1971 through to 1974. Some details about the location: the two men were at least 10 miles away from the nearest roads, and even those roads were only small logging roads. There was no serious access. They were high in elevation in the Sierra Nevadas. No hoaxers even knew about the site or their quest to capture this audio, and even if they had, it would have been highly difficult for a hoaxer to even reach the location. The recordings themselves have a whole lot of auditory variety. There are what appears to be conversations between a male and female Sasquatch. There are intimidation displays, noises that are obviously aggressive, perhaps trying to warn off the men in the campsite. There are various whoops of the sort that no known animal makes in North America, and yet have been reported by many other people who claim to have encountered Sasquatch-like beings on the continent. And finally, there are various examples of very language-like chatter that's reminiscent of human conversation, and yet decidedly non-human. Now, before we get into the proof that many of these sounds are in fact a language, let's talk about how we can know that the Sierra sounds aren't fake. First of all, we've got expert authentication. Dr. Arlen Curlin is an electrical engineer and audio analyst from the University of Wyoming, and he spent an entire year analyzing the recordings. He analyzed the frequency, the amplitude, and the rhythm of the Sierra sounds, and he said, quote, "We found the sounds to be made by a creature with a much larger vocal range than humans, not fabricated." Dr. Curlin has explained that certain elements of the Sierra sounds, like the vocal tract length, which is very unique in that it's much longer than the vocal tract length of an average human, can indicate to us with surprising accuracy the size and height of the creature that made the sound. With that in mind, Dr. Curlin estimates, based on the details that he has analyzed in the Sierra sounds, that at least one of the creatures that made the sounds was between 7 and 8 feet tall. The well-known audio analysis firm Cytonic Research Incorporated, based in New York, also analyzed the Sierra sounds. This firm is the one that analyzed President Nixon's Watergate tapes. The first thing they looked for was a telltale 60-cycle hum in the audio, almost imperceptible to the human ear, and yet with specialized equipment, very perceptible. This hum, if present, would have indicated studio pre-recording of the sounds, and therefore would have indicated fakery. But they didn't find the 60-cycle hum. Their sound engineers also noted that the voices on the tapes were, in their view, too powerful to be human voices, based on various specific details of the audio waveforms. In fact, the president of Cytonic Research, I.E. Teeble, said, quote, "The vocalizations had occurred at the time of the original recordings, were spontaneous, and were too powerful to have been human-made." And then there's Scott Nelson. He's a retired U.S. Navy cryptologic linguist with over 30 years of experience in the field of military linguistic analysis. During his service, Nelson was trained in transcription, translation, and analysis of complex foreign languages, including Russian, Spanish, and Persian, all of which he speaks fluently. His role in the U.S. Navy required him to decipher unknown, often encrypted communication patterns, exactly the kind of expertise you'd want to have when analyzing alleged non-human vocalizations that may include a language. Nelson also taught Russian at the prestigious Defense Language Institute, or DLI, in Monterey, California. And this is one of the most rigorous language training centers in the world, which is why it's used by various military intelligence services. Nelson also worked with the National Security Agency and focused on interpreting intercepted communications, which often lacked context or clear grammar systems, which is why he was hired to decipher meaning. These skills are obviously directly transferable to analyzing and deciphering potential language and meaning in audio like the Sierra sounds. When he first heard the Sierra sounds on Ron Morehead's website, Nelson immediately recognized linguistic structures. He says he noticed syntax, phonemes, which is a fancy way of saying recognizable and repeated words, and morphologic consistency within the vocalizations. After years of study and getting in touch with Ron Morehead to listen to the original recordings, Nelson concluded that the sounds represent a complex, structured language, not random animal noise or a hoax. He said, quote, "These vocalizations contain language-like structure and repeatable phonemes. This is not random gibberish." Another expert who's independently analyzed the Sierra sounds and come forward with a statement in favor of their authenticity, and who, by the way, has no vested interest in saying the Sierra sounds are authentic, is Nancy Logan. She's a human speech expert who says, quote, "I believe that some of the primitive communication is going on in the form of primitive language. I still think it is a language. I challenge anyone to make those exact same noises with the exact same pronunciation at that speed." It's worth noting that Nancy Logan, again, was not affiliated with the Sierra Camp or the Sierra Sounds venture. She wasn't connected to Ron Morehead, Al Berry, Scott Nelson, or anyone else who's delved into the Sierra Sounds, and she has no ties to any cryptozoology group. Her statement was made after independently analyzing the original Sierra sounds out of pure personal interest. If you read more of what she says, she basically concluded that the vocalizations were sufficiently strange in their precise pronunciation and rapid delivery to be impossible to be imitated accurately by humans, and that they're likely an example of an unknown form of primitive communication. Nancy's analysis is particularly interesting because it's another rare instance where a verified expert in human vocal analysis, similar to Scott Nelson, who, like him, has no direct stake in the Bigfoot hypothesis, has publicly affirmed that the Sierra Sound tapes contain features that are inconsistent with human origin fakes. The Sierra Sounds include vocal range that exceeds human norms. There's also clear evidence, according to all of the experts we've mentioned, of lung capacity necessary for certain sounds, suggestive of a massive chest cavity. The sound pressure levels are not consistent with a human or a known animal. Many close-minded skeptics who hear the Sierra sounds make the claim that they're obviously fake and clearly humans, just making goofy human noises. And we'll examine those claims in great detail a little later in the video, but the short answer for now is that many audio and linguistics experts have analyzed the recordings for far longer than a casual listen through on the internet, and say that the sounds are definitely not human or any known animal. Another reason we can know the Sierra sounds are legitimate is the environmental confirmation. Again, there were no roads or vehicle access to the area. They were miles from the nearest drivable road. Multiple witnesses of the events that led to the recordings have also corroborated the story put forward by Morehead and Berry. Morehead and Berry weren't the only ones there at the time. There were at least 3 others, like Warren Johnson, who was one of the original hunters who owned and maintained the remote deer hunting camp in the Sierra Nevadas where the recordings happened. He and his friend Bill first experienced the strange vocalizations that were later captured by Morehead and Berry, and also found large footprints that prompted them to call Morehead and Berry, and that's what led to the Sierra sounds being captured in the first place. Bill McDowell, along with Warren, was also present during multiple nights of Sierra sound recordings. In Ron Morehead's book, Voices in the Wilderness, Bill has gone on record as saying that in addition to the Sierra sounds, he has heard unusual clicking noises outside the shelter in the area where the recordings happened, closely matching Ron's experience. And finally, there's Lewis Johnson. He, Ron, and Bill reportedly heard those same mysterious clicking sounds that seemed to enter even the enclosed shelter area where they were camping. So that's a pretty good summation of how we can know that the Sierra sounds are authentic, untampered recordings of an unknown species. But how do we know that those sounds include a language? Well, first of all, there's linguistic structure. Scott Nelson's analysis includes the noting of phonetic consistency, repeated morphemes, and syntax rules. He says, quote, "It has all the hallmarks of a spoken language: stress, pitch, morphology, and grammar."
So I played it over again and over, and my son said, "Dad, what are you doing? What's wrong with you?" I said, "Son, there's a language here, and that is not a human being."
There's the presence of turn-taking among different beings with different voices, one speaking and then another responding. And there's also very clear emotional modulation. These are all hallmarks of intelligent conversation, not random animal noise or a human hoaxer trying to imitate their idea of Bigfoot. We also have comparisons to human language. The range of sounds in the Sierra Sound recordings exceeds any known human dialect. But despite the differences between the recordings and known human languages, there are also many similarities to tonal and click languages, similarities in structure. And finally, although there are some similarities to the sounds made by known primates, there are no consistently matching patterns in the sounds compared to known primates. There are also no consistent matches with wolves, birds, and other known North American species. So to recap, experts emphasize that this is not English, this is not a known human language, and the sounds themselves are not human. What we're likely dealing with is a proto-language, or an entirely distinct one, evolved for wild and primitive communication. Now let's talk about attempts to translate or understand the meaning of the Sierra Sounds. First of all, we have Scott Nelson's ongoing work. Nelson has identified consistent words and hypothesizes meanings based on context. In fact, he's written an entire highly detailed paper with phonetic transcriptions of the repeated sounds that he's observed over years and thousands of listens through the Sierra Sounds, sometimes slowed down, sometimes sped up, sometimes at normal speed, to pull all the meaning he possibly can from this audio. There are definitely words and phrases there, according to him. And if anyone would know, it would be a 30-year veteran U.S. Navy cryptolinguist. Nelson says that there are warning calls, greetings, there's frustration expressed at times. He says, quote, "We may not know what they're saying, but we know that they are saying something." And then there's behavioral correlation. Playbacks of the Sierra Sounds in the field have led to Sasquatch responses from the woods, more sounds that are no known animal or human.
And here's some cracking. Hear that?
These patterns suggest a meaning response structure, like call and response conversation. Ron Morehead recalls emotional tone changes correlating with specific events, like food gifts leading to warmer expressions of sound, or human presence leading to aggressive displays. So what would we need to make a true translation of the language that's being expressed in the Sierra Sounds? Well, first of all, we'd need more recordings from multiple locations. We'd need corroboration of behavior and vocal response. We'd need long-term interaction with a habituated group, and potentially the use of AI with phonetic pattern recognition systems in place. Next, let's delve into other language-like purported Sasquatch vocalizations. First of all, we have samurai chatter. The term samurai chatter is a reference to the famous segment of the Sierra Sounds that involves very fast-paced chatter, reminiscent of Japanese in some ways. This same chatter has been reported in multiple regions outside the Sierra Sounds origin. These other reports involve similar phrasing and rhythm, according to witnesses, and point to regional dialect or species-level language systems. Native American accounts also describe Sasquatches mimicking and speaking in their own tongue. According to a Sta'alis tribe elder interviewed by journalist J.W. Burns, Sasquatches not only have their own language, but can speak and understand known human languages as well. Honestly, that's a bit of an unsettling thought. So, what does all this mean for Bigfoot research as a whole? Well, this is a strong implication of intelligence, first of all. Language implies planning. It implies social structure, memory, and teaching. If Sasquatches speak, that means they're far beyond a simple missing link or undiscovered primate. They're a non-human, although perhaps in some ways partially human at the same time, people group. So why are reports of vocalizations that have the hallmarks of language so rare or hidden? Well, avoiding detection might be a primary motivation for Sasquatches, and that would require cryptic, quiet communication, possibly ultrasonic or even infrasound. This could easily explain why researchers so rarely hear these vocalizations outside of trusted hotspots. Now, let's talk about the many skeptical claims that have been leveled at Ron Morehead, Al Berry, and the Sierra Sounds. First claim, it's just gibberish. Skeptics often claim the Sierra Sounds are just nonsense, random grunts, howls, or most often simply humans putting on a weird voice. But that argument falls apart under linguistic scrutiny. Again, we have the analyses of folks like Scott Nelson. He was trained to decipher encrypted languages. That was his stock in trade. And he found repeatable phonemes, consistent syntax, morphological structure, all the core components of a real language. He says, quote, "You can hoax language, but you can't hoax linguistic rules." To summarize, no animal, hoaxer, or human of any kind has ever produced anything that passes linguistic tests with this level of rigor applied. We've already pretty much covered the second skeptical claim, which is that a person could have been faking the sounds. But again, as we've already discussed, Ron Morehead and Al Berry were 10 miles from the nearest logging road. They were high up in the mountains. They had to carry in their own food and gear. There was no road, no light, no reason anyone could have followed them repeatedly through dense, bear-filled terrain just to scream into the woods and trick them. In fact, secrecy and isolation were key to this experiment. There were no marked trails leading to it, according to Morehead, who said, quote, "We never told anybody where the camp was. We never marked a trail. We were very careful about that." Everyone involved, Ron Morehead, Al Berry, Warren Johnson, Bill McDowell, and Lewis Johnson, intentionally kept the location secret, even from family and friends. No one outside this core group knew the exact coordinates or even the timing of their trips. So what does all this mean for skeptical claims? Well, any theory suggesting an outside prankster following the men into the mountain campsite undetected, lugging bulky sound equipment and somehow vocalizing sounds clearly beyond human lung capacity, without knowing the group would even be there, it's beyond unlikely. It's logistically and practically impossible. So yeah, no one not present at the camp could realistically have known they were there, much less had the means or motive to stage such a complex, multi-year hoax deep in the mountains. Another skeptical claim, which we've pretty much already covered, but it's worth touching on again, is that the audio could have been tampered with. But let's not forget, this was the 1970s, well before digital audio editing, and the original cassettes have been analyzed multiple times. There are no signs of tape splicing, no signature 60-cycle hum that would have been a dead giveaway of pre-recorded studio work, and no frequency irregularities that would indicate artificial mixing or sound overlays. I would challenge any open-minded skeptics of the Sierra Sounds to do what Dr. Arlen Kurland did. Examine them with a fine-tooth comb for an entire year, and then come away and say that they're fake. Another common skeptical claim is that Berry and Morehead got rich off of their recordings. Clearly, they set up this elaborate audio hoax to get famous and earn money. But the thing is, that's not true. They did nothing of the sort. The recordings weren't even released publicly for decades after the fact. Morehead and Berry weren't chasing fame, clearly. They were simply seeking answers. So if this was a hoax motivated by money-making greed, it was the worst monetization plan in history. But if it was real, their behavior makes sense. Document first, release cautiously later, after experts have corroborated authenticity. Bottom line is, every audio and linguistics expert who has taken the time and effort to examine the Sierra Sounds in a detailed way has come to the same conclusion. They're not human, they're not animal, there's a language there. If you're finding yourself refusing to budge in your view that these recordings are fake, ask yourself, Do you honestly feel that you're better qualified to make that determination than the variety of experts we've mentioned here? And if so, why? Especially considering the fact that the professionals I've mentioned here, who have come out with statements in support of the Sierra sounds being authentic, have nothing to gain by saying so, and in fact, a great deal to lose, both professionally and personally. If it's not obvious by now, it doesn't do your career any favors, regardless of the field you're in, to publicly say that not only are Sasquatches real, but you have proof of it. Now, all that said, I can quote audio and linguistics experts until I'm blue in the face, but the bottom line is, if someone doesn't want to believe the Sierra sounds are authentic, all the facts in the world won't convince them that they are. They'll still claim that this is just a human and that they could easily imitate those sounds themselves, regardless of what the experts say. So, what are our conclusions in all this? Well, this is a new frontier in cryptolinguistics. The Sierra sounds, according to multiple experts who have analyzed them at great length and in incredible detail, are not fake. They contain a real, recognizable language. Scott Nelson said, quote, "This is not a matter of belief. It's a matter of listening with an open mind." What I take away from all this is that if Sasquatches have a language, that means they have a culture. And if they have a culture, they have a story worth hearing, it seems to me. So I think we should be open-minded about that story and try to find out what it is. Pretty fascinating stuff, isn't it? When you put all this together, it seems like a pretty airtight case that Bigfoot not only exists, but has a recognizable language with repeated words and phrases, emotion, and complex meaning. So why do you figure most people are so dead set against believing this? I think they like to cover their objections with a veneer of logic, but of course that's easily peeled away by the actual facts. Ultimately, I think the hard-nosed variety of skepticism you see around the Sierra sounds and other recordings comes from a place of fear. Fear that maybe humans are not the only intelligent bipedal hominids roaming the earth. And that causes a lot of people to feel they have to start over in their worldview as far as who we are on this earth and where we fit into the web of species as a whole. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on the idea of a Sasquatch language and the evidence I presented here in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to Cabin in the Woods. If you want to show me extra support, I'll leave a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the description, or you can sign up as a Cabin in the Woods channel member, or even buy my Cabin in the Woods exclusive merch. All of these things help me to keep putting out videos like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.